So it is my honor to introduce our keynote tonight. As I let Malik know that we serve dinner after the keynote because we just want folks' attention dedicated. So I forgot to announce that earlier, but you already have some yummy food I can see. You're enjoying the kale salad, and you probably saw in the program, but Malik is the second speaker from Detroit Black Community Food Security Network to give the only organization that will have given 2 keynotes at SLE. And the first one was Abba Ifeoma, and it was the year, who was the beekeeper at the time, and it was the year that we were publishing our second book, which you can get at our table. And we were soliciting recipes at SLE, and she hand wrote out this kale salad recipe, and we've enjoyed it in our home, but also at many events ever since. And I thought because Malik was speaking tonight, we should honor Abba and have the salad. So Malik Kenyatta-Yakini is giving a keynote tonight entitled Black Food Sovereignty, Local to Global. He is co-founder and executive director of Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, it is now called. He is also the co-founder of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. And I had the honor and pleasure of traveling to Cameroon, as was mentioned, last fall, and after sort of seeing Malik present at many conferences and seeing what a giant he is in the food justice movement, admiring him from afar, I had this amazing experience of getting to travel to Cameroon with him because he nominated Food Sovereignty Ghana to win the Food Sovereignty Prize, which is something that we help coordinate. And so we invited him to participate in all the events around that prize because Food Sovereignty Ghana won the prize. And then because of that, it was just like, you know what? This is the person that we need to invite to participate in this work with us. And he made himself available like in just a couple weeks. And it was just such an exciting thing. And the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance supported that trip. So as a longtime Pan-Africanist who views his food justice work in Detroit as part of the larger movement for building power, self-determination, and justice for African people, he embodies the local to global connections that CAGJ has always strived to make, to situate local organizing in global movement building. I personally am particularly inspired by Malik's interest and vision in contributing to the development of an international Black food sovereignty movement that embraces Black communities in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa, and hope we'll continue to work in solidarity with African partners together. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Malik.
Appreciate it. This one?
Yeah. You mind holding it?
I don't mind holding it.
Okay, great.
Okay. Good evening. How's everyone doing? Go ahead. She just had, yesterday she had a boot on her foot because it was injured, and so I guess she's trying to re-injure it. So let me start by saying I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to follow my sister Abba Ifeoma, who's one of the co-founders of the organization that I lead. I'm honored to be in partnership and solidarity with the Community Alliance for Global Justice, which is doing tremendous work that you just saw. You just saw a summary of all of that work, but particularly the international work involving U.S. policy and U.S. corporate policy towards the African continent is very important. So I'm going to talk rapidly because she's asked me to try to confine my remarks to 20 to 25 minutes, and it's always difficult when the speaker is standing between the audience and dinner. So I'm going to try to be brief in my remarks, as brief as I can, but still trying to give you an overview on the topic. So first I always begin by giving praise to the Creator, and whatever your spiritual path may be, I respect that. I'm not trying to impose mine on anybody else, but I am required to put that out in front of me because that's the platform that I stand on, and it allows me to be bold and fearless. Secondly, I want to acknowledge my ancestors, those who are in my personal bloodline, as well as those that African American people share collectively. Thirdly, I want to acknowledge my comrades that I work with in the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network in the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, and in the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And then finally, I want to just give a shout out of solidarity to the Palestinian people. So how many people like stories? Great, because I want to tell you a story called Hot Cocoa. And it's really intended to be kind of humorous, but hopefully you'll be able to glean some important lessons from it. I wrote this actually about 2 years ago during the winter in the height of the pandemic, so just to give you a little context. Every morning for the past few weeks, perhaps to soothe the discomfort of social isolation and to provide an antidote to Michigan's winter temperatures, I've enjoyed a cup of hot cocoa. It's a good alternative to Starbucks chai tea latte that somehow I got hooked on a few years ago. Here's how it started. I was riding in a van with 7 or 8 other people traveling from Detroit to Brooklyn in early November for the annual Black Urban Gardeners and Farmers Conference. Midway through the trip, we made a rest stop at a plaza where there was a Starbucks. One of my friends in the van, who actually happened to be Abba Ifeoma, who was vegan, mentioned that she was going to get a chai tea latte made with soy milk. I had never been in a Starbucks and didn't know that they sold anything a vegan could consume. I had never had a cappuccino, a frappuccino, or a latte, and imagined Starbucks as a place frequented by bourgeois gentrifiers with small dogs. By the way, is Seattle the white people walking dogs capital of the United States? That question just came to my mind this morning. I followed my friend's lead and ordered the chai tea latte made with soy milk. I've never been a coffee drinker. My mother and father drank coffee, and my brother all drank coffee, but I never got into it. Frankly, I didn't like the taste. Even as a child, I didn't like coffee ice cream. I never drank a cup of coffee in my life with the exception of a shot glass size cup of coffee that I was offered in Senegal, which I thought was tea before I drank it. Anyway, back to the rest stop on the way to New York City. I returned quickly to the van to get out of the cold, windy Pennsylvania mountain weather. I settled back into my seat in the second row of the van. My comrades boarded and we were back on the highway. As I was holding the cup of chai, I suddenly realized the comfort that holding a cup full of a warm beverage brings to coffee drinkers. It was an aha moment. I slowly sipped my first chai tea latte as we barreled down the turnpike. It was great. Thus began my descent into the corporate hands of Starbucks. I learned the tricky lingo used by Starbucks to describe the sizes of their cups. A tall is the second smallest size at 12 ounces. A grande, which means large in Spanish, is the medium-sized cup at 16 ounces. And a venti, which means 20, is their larger size and is actually 24 ounces. On many a cold March, April, October, or November mornings, I stopped at Starbucks before opening D-Town Farm. With the help of some of my comrades, I've come to more fully appreciate while I should not be supportive of Starbucks when there are local coffee shops struggling to survive. I have drastically reduced my trips to Starbucks, but still occasionally enjoy a chai tea latte. Maybe the hot cocoa I've been drinking for the past few weeks is taking the place of my beloved chai tea latte. But this story is not really about Starbucks or hot cocoa. Well, not exactly. I was making my hot cocoa this morning, and I perfected a method where I put 2 teaspoons of raw sugar in a cup, followed by 1 teaspoon of cocoa powder. Recently, at the suggestion of a friend, I tried adding a little cinnamon. I mixed the dry ingredients, then heat up a cup of almond coconut milk. I poured, well actually now it's oat milk, but at that time, I was still on the almond tip, right? We'll talk about that later. I pour a little of the hot milk into the cup, stir the ingredients until they dissolve, then pour the rest into a cup pour the rest of the milk in and stir again. As I sat down in front of my computer with my cup of hot cocoa, I thought about the geographic origins of almonds, coconut, cocoa, sugar, and cinnamon, and how history has converged so that the descendant of West Africans, with some slave master's blood in the mix, is sitting in North America in a place the French colonists called Detroit, drinking a morning beverage made from cocoa from West Africa, with sugar likely from Brazil, almonds probably from California, and coconuts and cinnamon perhaps from Indonesia. As we eat for health and pleasure, we don't typically think about the global systems that grow, harvest, process, and transport foods from all over the world to our local grocery store. Even the most radical among us have the expectations that we should be able to drive to a local grocery store and purchase our favorite products from anywhere in the world at any time of the year. You want tomatoes, avocados, oranges, or bananas in January in Detroit? No problem. Global capitalism brings it to your neighborhood or a white suburb near your neighborhood if you live in an area impacted by food apartheid. Our taste buds have become accustomed and in some cases addicted to flavors and textures from faraway places. To be clear, for most of human history, people either migrated seasonally, following plant and animal food sources, or have primarily eaten foods that originated where they live. With the cross-cultural contact between peoples across geographic boundaries, traders seeking to make a buck transported highly prized food items from one region to another. In Sudanic West Africa, salt was so highly prized that it was dried into blocks and used as a form of currency. Coffee from the highlands of Ethiopia became a valued commodity in the Ottoman Empire and later in Italy and then the rest of Europe. Sugarcane originating in Asia and transported to the Caribbean was so valued by Western Europeans that it became an economic driver for the enslavement of millions of Africans who were also transported to the Caribbean to plant, harvest, and process the cane. In some ways, the desires of European aristocracy for prized foods from around the world motivated the global exploration and later global imperial designs of Western European nations. You may recall that Cristobal Colon, that murderous scoundrel whose name has been rendered Christopher Columbus in the Anglophonic world, and after whose name the word colony is derived, was in search of the mythical Golden Indies when he stumbled upon what is now the island home of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The Golden Indies were said to be rich in exotic spices as well as gold and jewels. What followed was 500 years of imperialism and colonialism that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of the global white ruling class and inversely underdeveloped Africans and the rest of the world's non-white peoples. This relationship provided Western Europeans and later their American descendants, at least those who could afford it, with sugar, salt, pepper, corn, beans, melons, and other foods from the global South. The food system that provides most of our food today is the inheritor of the exploitive legacy left by colonialism and imperialism. Capitalism invisibilizes the process by which foods from around the world end up on our plates and in our cups. The label on my box of powdered cocoa doesn't indicate a country of origin. Consumers thus don't have to think about where it came from, who grew it, who so-called owned the land it was grown on, who processed it, who transported it, and how the profits were divided. We don't have to think about the environmental impact of clearing forest lands for the farming of commodity crops or transporting food hundreds or thousands of miles. Fortunately, the label on my raw sugar is more transparent and says that the origin of this product is, quote, from a land where the tropical sun meets rich, fertile soil and cool mountain waters. Capitalism's got us by the taste buds. We're hooked. And not many of us will return to a way of life where we, our friends, and our neighbors are producing most of our own food. We are emotionally addicted to the taste and textures of our childhood. We have warm memories related to holiday meals or summer gatherings. In some ways, these tastes have come to define who we are. We're addicted to the boost of energy that sugar and caffeine give our bodies. And ironically, many meetings to plan the revolution have been held over cups of coffee. So, while we're thinking about how to create more justice in the world, let's give some thought as to how the current food system promotes land grabbing, exploitation of workers, environmental degradation, poor health, mindless consumerism, and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of already wealthy white men. And let's give some thought to what a fair, racially just, non-exploitive, non-extractive food system might look like. Thank you. Okay, now moving on quickly, I want to go to this PowerPoint, and is somebody controlling this, or do I have oh, you're doing that. Hey, what's up? You good? Okay, we're going to work together, me and you. Okay, so our organization, Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, we changed our name about 2 or 3 weeks ago from Food Security Network to Food Sovereignty, because we realized early on that really the work we're doing was more aligned with food sovereignty. And it's already been said that that term was coined by La Via Campesina. And I'll just say in summary that food security basically means that people have enough food to eat, that people are not hungry, that people have sufficient calories to go about their day-to-day work. But that's a very low bar. And my friend Raj Patel says that you can have food security in prison. And so clearly what we're struggling for is something beyond just people having sufficient calories. And that's something that we're struggling for is called food sovereignty. Because food sovereignty means that the people who produce and consume the food are shaping and defining the food system. And that's what we're concerned about. If you don't have this food sovereignty lens, then you may think that the answer to lack of food access in a community is bringing in a Walmart. Because on one level, that may solve the access problem. People have greater access to food. But we have no say-so in shaping what happens in Walmart. We have no say-so in their policies. And we certainly don't benefit from the profits. And so food sovereignty goes beyond just making sure that people have enough calories. And it empowers people to shape and define the food system that provides our food. In Detroit, one of the things that we're really adding to this definition of food sovereignty, because we live in a city that has about 640,000 people, 80% of whom are African American, but others, I'll just say that, various other ethnic groups control almost all of the grocery stores in the city of Detroit. So we've added to food sovereignty this idea that not only do the consumers and producers need to shape the system, but we need to be the ones that benefit from the profits that are derived from the production and buying and selling of food. So one of the things we do is we operate a 7-acre farm, D-Town Farm. Shout out to all the farmers in the house, by the way. Farmers, sure you can throw your hands up. You know, I was in Mali some years ago, and we were traveling with a small group, and we saw an elder sitting on the side of the road, and he actually had a shotgun like posted up next to him. And we said, let's just go over there and talk to the elder. And we had a brother with us who could translate. We had a very interesting conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, he pointed across the road and he said, before you leave the village, you have to go across the road and greet the farmers. And there were 2 farmers with oxen who were tilling the fields. And he said, the reason you have to go greet the farmer is because it's those who work in the sun who make it possible for those who work in the shade. So big up to the farmers. So we're building Black food sovereignty with the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, and one of the ways we do it is by inviting our communities to interact with us. This is not something that we're doing on our own. This is something that we are interacting with our brothers and sisters, our fellow community residents, to shape a local food system that we have control over. So one of the ways we do that is by encouraging people to come out and work with us on the weekends at D-Town Farm. This, by the way, is our board president, Dr. Shakira Tyler, who, when I step down next January 1st, will be one of the 2 co-executive directors of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. Next slide. So we grow more than 3 dozen different fruits, vegetables, and herbs at D-Town Farm. And you see a few pictures there. This is Mama Jackie Hunt, who was one of our founding members. Unfortunately, we lost her to COVID in 2020, as we lost many people in the city of Detroit. Detroit was hit very hard by COVID. We grow watermelons. We grow kale, which, you know, is a gentrifier's favorite, but also has become one of my favorites, I have to say. I didn't grow up eating kale, just for full transparency. I grew up eating collards, mustards, and turnips. And then as a grown man, I discovered this thing called kale. So sometimes I worry between the Starbucks and the kale, am I becoming a gentrifier? So also we have a harvest festival every year, because we found that everybody's not going to come out and put their hands in the soil. You got to be kind of cut from a certain kind of cloth to do that. And in American society in particular, a lot of people, they don't want to get dirt under their fingernails, or don't like the bugs or whatever. Everybody's not cut out for that, right? But so a certain number of people are going to come and put their hands in the soil, but other people, we can attract them by events like this, where we have music and speakers and food demonstrations. And so we have this annual harvest festival, which brings out hundreds of people who are not the same people who come out and volunteer at the farm, as a way of, again, broadening our community base of support. Next slide. This was our farm staff last year, and we sell our food primarily at a farm stand in front of the farm on weekends, but we also this year have a contract with the Michigan Department of Education. We're selling some food to them for boxes that go to families at schools. And then we also traditionally have sold at farmers markets. The main 2 farmers markets we sold at closed as a result of COVID and haven't opened back up. Next slide. We also, along with 2 other organizations in Detroit, lead the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund. And the other 2 organizations are called Oakland Avenue Urban Farm and Keep Growing Detroit. And so since 2020, the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund has amassed funds, primarily from individual donations, and given grants to 120 farmers, black farmers in the city of Detroit, to either buy the land that they're farming on or to buy infrastructure to support them. And so we are nurturing a new kind of generation of black farmers in the city of Detroit. Next slide. We also have 2 youth programs. We understand that for our movement to be sustainable, we don't only have to use, or we have to go beyond just using sustainable agricultural techniques, but our movement itself has to be sustainable. And one of the ways we make it sustainable is by intentionally nurturing young people, by bringing young people into this work, so it's not all people with gray in their hair, and it's people who have youth and vibrancy and can carry this baton forward. And so we intentionally organize youth in 2 programs, one called Food and Flavor, which is for high school students, and the other one is called the Food Warriors for young people in elementary school. Next slide. The big project that we're working on now is called the Detroit Food Commons, and this is the artist rendition of this building. We're building a 2-story, 31,000 square foot new building right on the main street in Detroit, and it will house the Detroit People's Food Co-op on the first floor, a cooperative grocery store that we have taken the lead in organizing, and on the second floor we have 4 shared use kitchens, a community meeting space about the size of this room, and office space. This was some photos from our groundbreaking last April 23rd. This is part of our staff and board at the groundbreaking with shovels doing the symbolic, you know how they do. And then, can you go back? And then we have Mama Hanifa, who's our youth and education. She's actually education and outreach director is her title, but she runs our youth programs that I just talked about. And this was her at the groundbreaking doing a vermicomposting workshop at the groundbreaking. We turned the groundbreaking into a whole community event. This is Angela Lugo Thomas, one of the board members of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, and that's me ranting and railing against capitalism and white supremacy at the groundbreaking. So this was in July. This is what the building looked like. July 9th, keep going. This is what the building looked like last week. So we are about 90% finished with the building. And this is this is on the first floor in the grocery store itself. Some pictures I took last week. We have most of the equipment in. It hasn't all been installed yet. Much of it has been installed. And we're expecting to open in February of 2024. Next slide. This is our co-op board president, Lene Gilbert Williams. And this was a few weeks ago in St. Paul at the Up and Coming Food Co-op Conference when our peers voted the Detroit People's Food Co-op to be what they call the best of the up and coming food co-ops that are developing across the country. And so this is our board president proudly displaying the plaque that we were given. Next slide. But this work is also national. And so while it's important, I think it's most important that we do the work where we are locally. You know, you got to do it right there on the ground where you are, but you also have to have a vision that compels you to connect with other people across the country who are doing work, and then also internationally. And so as I'm ending this presentation, I want to go through some of the national work that's happening and some of the international work. If you go back one slide. So the National Black Food and Justice Alliance is an organization that myself and Dara Cooper and Beatrice Beckford started in 2016, I think it was. And the work of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance is we convene black co-op developers. We address the issue of black land loss. We have established the first of what will be several agroecology centers at HBCUs. And the first one was established at Florida A&M and opened last November. And it's called the Lola Pender Frank, I forget the name, forgive me. But it's an agroecology center named after two local activists and farmers, black activists and farmers in Florida. And also we work to influence policy, such as the Justice for Black Farmers Act that Senator Cory Booker introduced, which has not passed yet, let me see. But Leah Penniman, who is one of our members, and some of her staff worked directly with Senator Booker to help develop that legislation. Also, we're working with folks internationally. So Heather mentioned that I'm a longtime Pan-Africanist, and that's absolutely true. I'm convinced that the problems of black people in particular can't be solved only within the American context, because the problems are essentially the same whether black people are in the United States, the Caribbean, South America, Africa, and so we are stronger together, let's just say that. And that's not to say because I'm a Pan-Africanist that I don't recognize that other people around the world are oppressed and that we should not stand in solidarity with them. So I'm both a Pan-Africanist and an internationalist and in favor of freedom and justice for all human beings. So, we go back. So this is my teacher, Anand Laloli. He's from Guyana, South America originally, but he's lived in Toronto since the 1980s. We actually first met in the early 1980s because I'm a musician, and I was playing in a reggae band that played in Toronto a lot, and he was a bass player playing in Canada's top reggae band at the time, and we often did shows together. We had no interest in food security, food sovereignty at that point in time. We connected around reggae music. But then, as time went on, we kind of actually lost contact for 15 years, and then I saw him in the late 1990s, and he exposed me to this term, community food security. I'd never heard this before. I was gardening, but I didn't know there was this larger movement of people trying to create a more just food system. So I stand on his shoulders. But he is currently heading what's called the Toronto Black Food Sovereignty Working Group. And I want to point this out to you because the city of Toronto, the government itself, has actually created what they call an Office of Anti-Black Racism. Do y'all have that in Seattle? You have that? No, but I'm saying, has the city government created a department, allocated funds, and acknowledged that anti-black racism is the thing? I didn't think so. We don't have it in Detroit either. But they somehow have gotten the government of Toronto to endorse this and to fund this work of the Toronto Black Food Sovereignty Working Group. I just want to put it on your radar so that you can do some further research. If you Google that, you'll come up with a lot of the documents they've developed. In many ways, I think they created a template that can be duplicated either in whole or part in other cities in North America. Next slide. So, as Heather mentioned, she invited me to attend the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa's biennial meeting, which occurred last November, and I was pleased to be able to go and to connect with people on the African continent. I was the only so-called African American in attendance, and so I felt I had a tremendous responsibility to represent the home team. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm down with the African world community, wherever you're from. I'm from Detroit, though, and I'm not, you know, that's what I'm repping. So, on the first day of the conference, they asked people to wear what they said was traditional costume. And so, there were 170 or so delegates from 30 different African countries. These were two who were dressed in their traditional garb. Now, as an American-born African who descended from people who were enslaved, I was a little confused about what I should wear as my traditional dress. I didn't know if I should wear a zoot suit or a hoodie and some Timbs, or I didn't know, you know. So anyway, I ended up wearing a dashiki from Ghana and worked out already. So at the conference, a major theme was kicked off. In French, it's Je mange africain. In English, it's My Food is African. And what this is intended to address is a phenomenon that occurs throughout the world, and that is that this global system of white supremacy permeates our thinking and suggests to us that if something is associated with white people, Europe or America, that somehow it's inherently better. In fact, in Detroit, where I come from, when I was growing up, sometimes people used to say, the white man's ice is colder. Have y'all heard that before? Say that again? The white man's ice is colder. Right? So, I mean, this is the thing, right? That part of what happens when you have oppressive systems is not only do the people who are doing the oppression ingest these narratives that they believe to be true, but the oppressed also ingest narratives about themselves that inevitably lead to them seeing themselves in a diminished, inferior way. And so as we are doing the work of combating the system of white supremacy and capitalism and its evil twin sister, or twin brother, maybe I should say, patriarchy, as we're working to unravel those things, we have to be conscious that we're also unraveling them within ourselves. We're not just unraveling these systems, but we have internalized these ideas about white supremacy. And that's true whether you are a black person, a person of color, or a so-called white person. We've all ingested these ideas related to white supremacy, and hopefully we're all in the process of healing from that. Likewise, we've all ingested ideas related to patriarchy, and that infects all of our thinking, and we have to grow beyond that as well. So anyway, Je mange africain is to uplift foods from the African continent, which often are more nutritious than those so-called Western foods that are imported, are often more climate resilient, but the thing we have to do is now convince African people that the food that they have eaten for centuries, that their ancestors produced, is as good as or better than the food coming from Europe or America. So thus, the campaign, My Food is African. Let's go to the next slide. So on the second day, we were able to attend a vocational training center that teaches people agroecology and in a city called Mefo. And there's actually a little video clip. Can you see if the video clip will play? Don't worry. There's some drumming and dancing I wish you could see, but I'll just say it was incredible. A lot of people know about djembes in the United States. In fact, the djembe has become almost the universal African drum. But in Cameroon, we didn't see many djembes. We saw more long drums and other types of drums. So they did a wonderful drumming and dancing exhibition for us when we first arrived at the city, and the mayor greeted us. Next slide. So once we got to the center, we were welcomed by more drumming and dancing, and we got to see the various ways in which they're doing agriculture, including the terracing that they were doing on the side of the hill, growing bananas, doing companion planting. You see half of Heather's face. If the words weren't there, you would see her whole face, but she was having a great time. Next slide. On the last day, I had the opportunity to address all of the attendees at the conference, and I reminded them of the central role that Africans from the so-called Western Hemisphere have played in developing the idea of Pan-Africanism. The idea of Pan-Africanism did not develop on the African continent. It developed primarily in the Caribbean, in Trinidad with people like Henry Sylvester Williams, and because of many of these folks in the Caribbean and from the United States, sometimes being in London, had influence on emerging African anti-colonial leaders, or in the case of Kwame Nkrumah, perhaps the greatest Pan-Africanist. He went to school at Lincoln University in the United States and was influenced by these ideas that came from the so-called Western Hemisphere. So I wanted to remind the conference participants of the importance of making sure that as we're looking at organizing the African continent for greater self-sufficiency, that we have a Pan-African view, and that we're making sure that we're looking at what the Organization of African, what do they call it now? The African Union, I'm sorry. What they call the sixth region, which is the diaspora. That they have acknowledged that black people throughout the African diaspora are in fact part of the African continent and are represented by the AU, the African Union. One of the most significant connections I made with this brother was with this brother Karubel Tadale, who is from Ethiopia and is the communications officer for AFSA, but happens to live in Dallas. And so on the way back, actually, Heather, Karubel and I were all on the same flight, so we got a chance to spend some time. But I've been in touch with him several times since returning, and in fact, he was in Dallas a few months ago and kind of co-presented with me. And so he's a key person in connecting the black food sovereignty work here in the United States with the work that's happening on the African continent. Next slide. I'm wrapping it up. So there were many, many other meaningful connections there that were made. Some of the folks, Heather introduced me to a lot of people. She knew these folks because she's been several times. But it was just a wonderful experience. And so for those African Americans, if you define yourself in that way, who have bought into this idea that Africans don't like us, let me just dispel that, okay? I got so much love and there was so much unity that it was just incredible. So it was a wonderful experience. Next slide. So this is our sister Charity Hicks. Actually, the first slide I began with was our brother Kadiri Sinefara, who is now an ancestor, who also came out. He didn't do a keynote for this, but Heather brought him out several years ago for some event. I don't even remember which event it was, but I started with him because he's an ancestor, and I'm ending with Sister Charity Hicks, who is one of the co-founders of our organization, who is also an ancestor, and she often used to remind us to wage love. Next slide. And so if you're interested in contacting us, this is how you do it. So I'm told I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to wrap this up in, I now have 3. So I'm breaking out of the European, the Eurocentric idea of time. Time is an illusion. No, I'll try to adhere to the 3 minutes. So, you know, we hear a lot about fighting what we're against, and I'm for that. I'm down for the fight. I'm with it. Also, in addition to fighting what we're against, we have to define clearly what we're for. And I would say even defining what we're for is more important than what we're against. We have to create a vision, because you can't really build a movement just of what you're against. You have to build a movement based on vision of what you're trying to create, of what the new world could be. And so, in many ways, our movement and the organizations within our movement become a microcosm of the society that we're trying to bring into being. And so we have the responsibility within our organizations and within ourselves of eliminating the vestiges of white supremacy, patriarchy, and the kind of classist notions that marginalize and denigrate people. And we have to nurture relationships that are rooted in love, caring, compassion, respect, equity, justice, collective decision-making, mutual benefit, and trust. And I want to end by just reading a short essay that I wrote last year. I'm still within the time frame. This is not, don't worry, this is not like the first one, okay? This is short. But it's important that you pay careful attention. I got you? Okay. This has all just become too complex. I long ago gave up eating meat and fish for health reasons. I later developed a sensitivity for the environmental impact of corporate meat production and overfishing. I gave up eating white bread and white rice after reading Elijah Muhammad's How to Eat to Live in 1975. I stopped eating mucus-producing dairy products and eggs a few years later. But now is the biggest step of all, to give up eating altogether. Here's why. Some of my younger friends have warned me that the continued consumption of tofu or other soy products will result in me growing breasts and being, let's say, less manly. Dr. Sebi warned against eating hybrid foods, so there goes broccoli, carrots, kale, cauliflower, collards, beets, chard, spinach, celery, and most onions, potatoes, and tomatoes. Almonds and products made from almonds, such as almond milk and almond butter, require tremendous amounts of water to be grown and are thus unsustainable. Same with avocados, which each require about 60 gallons of water to grow to maturity. So no more almonds or avocados. Oranges, bananas, and pineapples are out of the question because of the carbon released into the atmosphere by transporting these tropical fruits hundreds of miles. Besides, Dr. Sebi said pineapples aren't good for you. Rice is also out because most of it is imported from thousands of miles away and has a high glycemic count. Cocoa, Brazil nuts, and chestnuts are out because of unfair labor practices. Oils aren't good for you, and much of the virgin olive oil on American shelves is fake. Using palm oil contributes to deforestation. If I only want to eat foods that are hyper-local, sustainably grown, using fair labor practices, and are not hybrids, I'm left to foraging for wild edibles. But they are also impacted by the toxins in the water and the soil. This has all just become too complex. So, I've made the difficult, but socially and environmentally responsible decision to resign from the eaters of the world. Henceforth, I will only extract energy from the sun and the air around us. I will be forced to distance myself from those of you who choose, despite the evidence of its harmful impact, to continue eating. Stay woke, vibrate higher, ban eating. Psych. Thank you.